Updates. Let's get some key reaction now from two leading Republican lawmakers at the very center of the GOP election revolt. Joining us now is Representative Paul Ryan. He's the ranking Republican on the House Budget Committee. We have Senator Judd Gregg, ranking member of the Senate Budget Committee. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Senator Gregg, let me just go to you first for a quick take. On the Summers departure, but Senator Gregg, everyone's leaving, and includes Rahm Emanuel's leaving. Orzog's gone. Romer's gone. Now Summers is gone. Geithner was in the same sentence yesterday where Obama flagged the departure of Summers. I worked for Ronald Reagan many years ago in his first term, and after 2 years, bumps and warts and all, we did not have this wholesale departure, Senator Gregg. What do you make of it, and what does it mean?
Well, that's because Ronald Reagan got his policies right. He cut taxes, he reduced spending, and he got the economy going again. He reinvigorated the spirit of American entrepreneurship. Now, let me just say to begin with that it's great to be on with Paul Ryan, who's a young gun in our party, as everybody's calling him, and he's an idea guy, and I really admire what he's doing on the House side. I happen to think this basically expresses the fundamental failure of this administration on the issues of economic policy, which are that they decided that the way you create growth is to radically expand the size of the government, take it from 20% of GDP up to 24% of GDP, headed towards 28% of GDP once the health care bill is fully implemented. It's not going to work. You can't close the gap on the deficit. You're adding all this debt, doubling it in 5 years, tripling it in 10 years. And as a result, the American people are looking at this and say, oh, wait, please stop the spending. Please stop the growth of government. And I think, I don't know if the president's gotten the message, but clearly some of his advisors have said, well, maybe it didn't work, so let's move on.
I mean, Congressman Ryan, first of all, welcome back, and congratulations on your young gun status. It's really cool, and you're going to be a great leader when you all take the House, as many believe possible. But let me go back to Larry Summers. He was rather pessimistic in his remarks to our own John Harwood on the economy. So, Paul, all these guys are leaving. We spent a couple $1 trillion and more. What did we get for it? And do these departures signal a change in your judgment?
Well, with these guys put in place their Keynesian experiments, they were all for it. It didn't work. We're at 9.6% unemployment. This stimulus is going to cost $1.1 trillion when you factor the borrowing in. It's failed, and they're leaving. But, you know, with Larry, you know, from my experience, Larry was sort of the voice of temperament and moderation within the administration. So he was probably closer to the center than most other advisors the president had surrounding him on economics. Now that Larry's leaving, gosh, I don't know. It seems to me that they're drifting more to the left than to the center with Larry's absence.
You know, Larry, I'd have to agree with that. I think Paul's absolutely right there. My dealings with Larry Summers, first, he's always been a straight shooter, and secondly, he tells you what he thinks. He's sort of New Englandish in that he's very curt, but I see that as a plus myself. But as a very practical matter, I do think he's one of the moderators in this administration of the policies which have moved dramatically left.
Listen, Congressman Ryan, business people have screamed for a senior CEO or business executive in one of these key slots. Either the chief of staff, Rahm Emanuel, is leaving. There are rumors in Washington and Chicago that Valerie Jarrett, who has virtually no experience in anything except political marketing, might take the job, and or they would like to see someone at the National Economic Council. Is it possible that President Obama will shift gears and put a businessman or businesswoman in one of these key slots?
It is possible that you will see a cosmetic change within the administration. What I do not see coming from the administration is a substance or a policy change coming from the administration. Look, the president is still pushing all this class warfare stuff. He still believes in redistributionary economics. It doesn't work. They still believe in all this demand-side spending stuff. They just called us back into session in August to do another stimulus, bailout of the states. So I don't see a policy shift. Yeah, you might see a cosmetic shift with the faces and the names and the resumes of who's entering the administration, but I have no indication that there's going to be a policy shift. If anything, like I said earlier, with Larry's absence, with Orzog's leaving, you're going to see them go farther to the left than anything.
Senator Gregg, yesterday at the CNBC town hall, President Obama essentially blamed Republicans for the inherited deficit, which he pegged at, I think, $1.3 trillion. He said the Republican Party spends too much and then cuts taxes without offsetting it, and it's the GOP that is the problem. You have a response to that?
Well, my response is he should listen to Harry Truman, one of the really great presidents of the last century, and certainly of modern times, when he said the buck stops here. As far as I can tell, with this presidency, the buck never stops at the president's desk. It's always somebody else's fault. Simple fact is that this administration has been in power for almost 2 years now, and they have passed the most massive expansion in the size of the government in our history in that period. And as a result, have exploded the deficits and the debt and are projecting deficits and debt 5, 10, 7 years from now that is over $1 trillion a year and continues to be over $1 trillion a year, doubling the debt in 5 years, tripling it in 10 years. Those are not the responsibilities of George Bush. This administration is the administration that's just growing the spending in an out-of-control way and growing the government in an out-of-control way because they genuinely believe. I mean, the president said it when he was first elected. He believes you create prosperity by growing the government. Well, you don't, unless you can pay for it. And you can't pay for it if you overtax the American people or you create all this deficit.
Congressman Ryan, I know the GOP is going to unveil its governing agenda on Thursday. I'm not going to ask you to step on your lines for Thursday, but I do want to ask you generically, will this new governing agenda be a full-throated economic and jobs recovery platform? Because it seems like that's what the country's looking for.
That is obviously the focus. It's on jobs, it's on recovery, it's on spending, it's on getting Congress to run the right way, not the lack of transparency we've had around here. But also, Judd gave you all the numbers. What this administration is doing is they're on a spending and borrowing tear. And yes, I think the president is very comfortable with higher tax rates on capital and on income. And they are basically advancing a philosophy of promoting equal outcomes, not equal opportunity. So what you're going to have coming from us, number one, is a very different philosophical statement. Get back to those core founding principles that make America exceptional. Here are the first steps we need to take to get us on the right path. We have to also acknowledge, Larry, that we're going to come into a situation of divided government if we get control of Congress. So we want to set expectations accordingly, given who the president's going to be and what we're going to do to get the first steps on the right path to get this nation back on track. They are taking this country in a very dangerous direction. We're going to have our own debt crisis, and we will have a doctrine of managed decline in a social welfare state if we don't watch ourselves. And we got to turn this stuff around fast. And we're going to be announcing the first steps that get us back on track on Thursday.
Congressman, in your Washington Post op-ed piece today, you mentioned 2 key points up front as early initiatives. Number 1, freeze tax rates for a couple years. Number 2, freeze the discretionary domestic budget at the 2008 levels. Is that the game plan? Are we talking the new term? Will we see this in a lame duck? How's that going to work, Congressman?
Well, lame duck will be controlled by Nancy Pelosi, so I can't tell you what's going to come out in lame duck. I hope that we can get the White House to agree, since if we're going to come into the majority, to keep all tax rates going for at least a couple years. We're going to keep pushing to prevent these tax increases from happening. And yes, we do want to freeze discretionary spending at the lowest level we can come up with. 2008 might be a good compromise. I'm not sure the president's going to do that. I'm very hopeful, though, that we can prevent these tax increases from hitting the economy in January.
Senator Gregg, let me ask you, there's a lot of speculation in the newspapers that a newly ascendant Republican Congress will go for a government shutdown in order to trim spending and so forth. What is your wisdom on that point? Is that in the cards? Is that what you hear? Would that be a mistake? How do you come out on the potential government shutdown?
It's absurd. And I think this is just the left trying, the media trying to create an issue that doesn't exist. That's not our goal at all. Our goal is to get control over the spending. Our goal is to do it in a responsible way, but understand that if we continue to run off of all this deficit and debt, the shutdown will come because we'll be basically bankrupting the country. That will create the shutdown. So we want to get the economy growing, and we want to get the government under control. And we want to do it in a way that has historically worked, which is you keep tax rates low and you keep spending in line with your ability to raise revenues. That means you keep spending under control. And that's our goal. It's very simple. And I think Paul made an excellent point. Hopefully we'll take the House and hopefully we'll take the Senate, but the president will still be president. So there's going to have to be some cooperation here, and it's a very practical matter. We're not trying to overpromise what we can do. We're just simply going to say that if we get control of these bodies, we're going to push this country and push the government towards being fiscally responsible and not spending money it doesn't have.
Let me just say, we're not looking for a government shutdown, but the CBO's own economic model says the entire economy shuts down in 2027 if we don't get this fixed. That's the urgency.
Congressman, I know you're going to be chairman of the Budget Committee if the GOP wins the House. That puts you in charge of the reconciliation process, which is a very important task. Can you use reconciliation to chip away and gradually roll back some of the unpopular Obama policies? Will that be the strategy?
Yes, you can. It's then a question of where Judd works and where he sits. The question is, who controls the Senate and where are the votes in the Senate. Reconciliation is the fastest, best path to get there. We do want to use reconciliation. You ultimately have to use reconciliation to get this problem fixed. The question as to success is where the Senate is next session.
All right, reconciliation being the reconciling of spending and revenues, spending ceilings, revenue floors, and you go through the appropriations process, Senator Gregg. Is Paul Ryan right? Is that an effective tool to gradually change the direction of policies with Congress essentially determining the purse strings?
Absolutely. Reconciliation passes the Senate with 51 votes, and it can adjust entitlement programs so that they're affordable. On the other side of the coin, you actually need very enforceable caps, and you need real pay-go in the area of spending. So there are things we can do if we get a majority here in the Senate, which would be very constructive to getting our fiscal house in order, making sure that the American people will get a government they can afford and a government that isn't going to bankrupt them and their children.
All right, gentlemen, I'd like to talk to you for the entire hour, maybe another time. You're both great to come on. We appreciate it. All the best, Representative Paul Ryan and Senator Judd Gregg. Next